we elaborate on what we're terming as the phenomena of builder Raj, in which we see that the real estate shapes the conceptual tools of urban planning and policy to the extent, as we see in also Bhim Nagar, disarming them to the extent that no struggle, no reaction, no there is no safeguards for the community to follow up on. So, in today's discussion, we've called speakers who are active in the struggle for housing and other urban rights in metropolitan cities. The aim is to reflect on challenges in securing urban citizenship rights under neoliberalism. You see, from Mumbai to Delhi to Bangalore, the rise of Builder Raj, which dominates the largest stakes in urban planning to expropriate inadequate basic urban infrastructure and services, and also to reflect on legal challenges around housing struggle that we face in our time, and to assert the need of people's movement to overcome these challenges in time where all rights of working classes under aggressive attack from neoliberal fascism. I will briefly introduce our speakers, and then we can proceed with the discussion. We have Gayatri Singh, who's a senior advocate at Bombay High Court. She's been actively working among migrant unorganized workers in representing them in several cases, and has also been following particularly the Bhim Nagar case since the beginning. And we've also helped us recently to assess the situation and understand the legalities involved. And our second speaker is Hussain Indorewala, who's a teacher and an urban researcher. He teaches at the Kamla Raheja Vidyanidhi Institute for Architecture in Mumbai. And his research work is focused on urban history, urban planning, and written extensively about political economy of land and housing and public transport. Our third speaker, who has not joined yet, but will do. Sorry, I did not see. Yeah, our third speaker is Shakeel Abdul. Is associated with Basti Suraksha Manch, an organization in Delhi which advocates for the right and welfare of marginalised communities in Delhi. We'll also have a more comprehensive understanding of how these the same frameworks and things involved work in across cities. So thank you everyone for joining. I for to start with, we will start with the recitation of a poem that we have. Also, it was written by one of our comrades, which was published in the booklet that I was mentioning earlier, Jabhinagar Against Builder Raj. The poem is called Builder Raj Ki Kahani. I will request Comrade Arpit if you can start the session with the recitation.
ओके तो ये पोयम है लिखी गई है जो कि जैसे पहले के शोषण में पहले के समाज में शोषण हुआ करते थे बंधुआ मजदूरी के तौर पे, अभी वैसा शोषण नहीं है। अभी शोषण चेंज हो गया है और ये मोर एंड मोर नए तरीके में आ गया है। जैसे पहले लाठी लेकर मजदूरों को मारते थे, अब वैसा स्थिति नहीं है। तो ये बिल्डर राज की कहानी एक पोयम है जो है कि पोयम का शीर्षक ही है बिल्डर राज की कहानी। जमींदारों की जमीन पर बंधुआ मजदूर पाए जाना अब आम नहीं है। अब आम नहीं है लठैतों से शुगुराम की पिटाई। वो जमाना कोई और था जब कुआं ठाकुर का, पानी ठाकुर का, गांव ठाकुर का, गांव को मिली आजादी। जब बड़े शहरों से उठी पुकार, चूल्हे किए गए बंद, हुआ एलपीजी स्वीकार और खुल गया शहरीकरण का संसार। आजाद शहर में आजाद हुए मजदूर, कहीं स्वेच्छा से गिरे गटर में, कहीं स्वेच्छा से उठाया बिल्डिंगों को, कहीं स्वेच्छा से दबे मलबों में। वो मलबे किसके हैं ये पड़ताल जारी है। मुर्दा लाश दबे इमारत के नीचे, ये बिल्डर की जिम्मेदारी है। जिन्हें लगे ये अपराध, उसे याद दिलाया जाएगा बिल्डर के पास घर है और पानी है। जमींदार चल दिए सिलिकॉन वैली, यही बिल्डर आज की कहानी है। तो स्टार्ट करते हैं आगे का डिस्कशन।
Thank you. I was. So, I think we can structure the discussion. I will start with Gayatri ma'am and followed by Shakil's talk, who will enlighten us about the legal framework both in Mumbai and Delhi around demolitions. And then we'll have a talk by Hussain, who will shed a light about urban infrastructure and citizenship rights. And followed by the all the three talks, we can have a open discussion where we can ask questions and engage. So, Gayatri ma'am, can you please start?
Yeah, hi everyone. Uh, uh, I mean, this issue is it's a depressing situation because uh, though our laws and the constitution provide for housing as a right, this is not being
So sorry,
implemented in any of the cities,
so sorry to
particularly.
disturb, ma'am. Like, we cannot see you.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you. Oh, it
So,
was.
uh, I mean, as far as the law is concerned, we have nice fancy laws, but they're not implemented as far as the slum dwellers are concerned. And but it is necessary to understand what rights we have under the law, and so I will just briefly deal with the existing laws, even though they are not being implemented. So the first aspect is, as far as international law is concerned, India is a signatory to one of the most important international instruments, which is the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which was implemented in 1966. India signed it in 1979. The importance of this covenant is that it deals with, particularly Article 11, deals with housing as a human right in terms of not only just simple housing, having a roof over one's head, but adequate housing, which implies safe living conditions, sanitation issues being hygienic, etc., etc. So this is one of the most important and crucial instruments which India has ratified and which it must adhere to. Two of the important aspects under this is in terms of forced evictions, that there should not be any forced evictions. Notice a detailed procedure has to be it has been set out, and also in terms of what constitutes adequate housing has been set out in the general comments which have been issued under the international covenant. So the most important, and this is relevant because general comment number 4 of this covenant deals with not only protection against forced eviction, but it also sets out what are the components of adequate housing. Adequate housing is not some abstract term, but it is something very specific, and what should be the basic core or the essential components of adequate housing has been set out. And I'll just very briefly set out those 7 components, which, as we all know, are not being followed in India. The first one is in terms of affordability. Housing should be affordable to the poor. Second is in terms of security of tenure, which of course, as we know, is not implemented in India because of the eligibility criteria. So large number of people are declared as ineligible. The third is accessibility, that there should be accessibility to housing in terms of people with disability, elderly persons, etc. Fourth is habitability, that it should be habitable. The construction quality should be good. Building standards should be maintained. There should be open spaces, which Hussein will talk about. Fifth is the infrastructure, amenities, and services that should be provided. And sixth is the location, that the rehabilitation should be in situ and not in some far off place. And the last one is that it should be culturally adequate in terms of housing, as we see in Dharavi. The people are basically being uprooted from their livelihoods and their living conditions. In fact, being evicted from the places where they're presently residing in. So these are the basic components, and also in terms of that not only should it just provide for adequate housing, that there should be no decline in living and housing conditions. So here in our Indian context, neither are the components followed, nor is there any guarantee or protection against declining living conditions. The situation gets even worse, where from wherever people are evicted, they go into worse conditions. And the second general comment, number 7 of the convention, deals with forced evictions. The procedure for evicting people has been set out, and this is particularly so in cases of large scale projects where people are just simply removed or evicted without any notice, without providing for rehabilitation, without providing for any alternate place where they can be resettled. Uh, this forced eviction resolution is important in our Indian context. Now, if we come to the Indian situation, India has, in its report to this convention, has also said, has accepted or acknowledged the fact that there is Article 21, which provides for a fundamental right to decent living, and also has acknowledged the fact that the directive principles provide for standardized living condition, proper living conditions, etc. Having acknowledged this, we know for a fact that these reports submitted by the government and the acceptance of the covenants has been violated, and the reports do not correctly reflect the existing situation. Coming to the Indian situation, the most important article is Article 21, which everybody knows, and I don't have to go into that, is the right to life, which has been broadened for the first time as early as in 1958 in the judgment of Francis. It was held that right to life includes not only just simple animal existence, but it is a right to live in human dignity. So this was the first development of law in terms of what is the meaning of right to life, which was further expanded in the Shanti Sir Builders case in 1990, which basically said that the basic needs of people is food, shelter, and clothing, and that right to life includes all these aspects, which is much more than animal existence. Then we come to the Chameli Singh case in 1996, which further expands the meaning of right to life to mean, again, to include right to food, shelter, decent environment, medical care, right to education, etc. Uh, it also says that the public sector should be involved in providing housing, that the responsibility is of the public sector, and that there should be resource allocation as far as affordable housing is concerned. And then we come to the Ahmedabad municipal case of 1997, which basically says that it is the duty of the state to provide shelter to people. As far as forced evictions are concerned, we have a number of cases, and Shakeel, uh, I'm sure, will refer to that. Is the famous Sudama Singh case, which basically set out the procedure as far as forced evictions are concerned, and again in the Ajay Makkan case, which basically again set out what those guidelines should be. Now, if we come to the statute, that is the law which prevails in different states have different laws, state laws, and in Maharashtra we have the Maharashtra Slum Areas Improvement Clearance and Redevelopment Act of 1971. This is very important because if we look at the bracketed portion of the act, it says improvement, clearance, and redevelopment. Yet, as we all know from our own experiences, the emphasis is more on clearance and redevelopment and not on improvement. Uh, the purpose of this act, if we look at the aims and objectives, is to improve the living conditions of slum dwellers. Therefore, it is a social legislation and must be interpreted broadly and not in narrow terms by restricting the rights of slum dwellers under the act, which presently is presently what is being done. The most important provision that I'm sure a lot of slum organizations have relied upon is Chapter 1, which basically deals with the declaration of slum areas. These areas, slum areas, must be declared as slum areas in order to improve the living conditions of those slums, and particularly in areas where which is congested, with no facilities or amenities being available, no infrastructure being available, people living in filthy conditions, no sanitation, no electricity, no water. Therefore, in such conditions, it is the duty of the government and the local authority to declare these areas as slums so that they can be improved. The second part of that of the act is the improvement the improvement works which should be carried out in those slum areas. So once it is declared as a slum, improvement conditions have to be carried out in terms of laying down sanitation pipes, drainage, providing electricity, etc. So the question of eligibility does not arise at all. As far as improvement of slum areas are concerned, there's no requirement that people who are residing there from a particular date should be provided with these facilities. It should be available to every resident in that area. The third part of this act is the problematic provision with regard to SRA schemes that were introduced in 1996. I don't want to go into too much of detail on that, but really this is the aim of the government to introduce slum rehabilitation schemes in areas which are profitable to the builders and where builders can make large sums of profit by redeveloping those areas. So we have what is known as Chapter 1A, which deals with the introduction of slum rehabilitation areas in particular areas. This chapter was introduced after a committee was appointed by the government, and the Afzalpur committee basically came up with some suggestions as to how slum redevelopment can take place, and it was their understanding that the only way in which improvement can take place is by introducing this particular amendment, which would allow slum rehabilitation schemes to come up in collaboration with private builders. Uh, Unfortunately, after this, that is in 1996, the entire focus of the Slum Act has been with regard to only development which can take place in areas with the help of developers. So the question of improvement, the question of declaring areas as slums has been completely ignored. And today the situation is that slum dwellers have to accept the fact that a slum rehabilitation scheme should come up, even if they are not agreeable to the scheme. The important part as far as the Slum Act is concerned is that it provides for what is known as protected occupants. So you have a definition of protected occupants, which basically has now been reduced to the eligibility criteria of a cutoff date And this has been introduced by GRs of 2015 and 2018, which basically say that the cutoff date is under the 2018 GR is up to 2011. So the attitude or the understanding or the direction that the courts are taking is that these are benefits which are given to slum dwellers who are basically encroachers. They are not entitled to these benefits, yet the government has been considerate in terms of extending these benefits, and therefore the cutoff date of 2011 should be frozen. And there should be no further concessions or rehabilitation schemes being introduced as far as the slum dwellers who come in after 2011 is concerned. Uh, so there have been a number of cases where because of the eligibility, a large number of slum dwellers have been rendered ineligible, and that is an issue which is most pressing and important. And this is a situation as far as a large number of slums are concerned, where eligibility is reduced to, say, maybe 10 or 20% of the residents of that area, and a large number, 50 to 80%, are declared as eligible. So the question of Mumbai being slum-free, which is what the government has been saying, that we are providing housing, and therefore our aim is to make Mumbai slum-free, is really non-issue, because ultimately it is a large number of people who are being displaced with no provision for housing. Uh, I would just like to say that as far as the SRA is concerned, it is the SRA authority which looks into all these aspects as to who the builder will be, which area should be declared as declared under an SR scheme, what should be the criteria for providing facilities to the slum dwellers. All these are issues which are decided by the SRA, and the slum dwellers have absolutely no say in terms of what they would prefer in terms of the development of the area is concerned. The other troubling issue is because in a recent judgment order of mangrove area in Charkop, uh, there is a provision in the Slum Act which basically says that those slums which are in CRZ areas or in forest areas or on land which belongs to central government will not be protected under the Slum Act. So this is an issue which we need to look into and to deal with it, because of the specific exclusion which is provided under the Slum Act. And therefore, large number of people, this is happening in Sanjay Gandhi National Park also, because people are in a forest area, they are being evicted. Same issue came up in Charkop, where the court basically said that they are not entitled to these benefits under the Act, and that they are taking advantage of the positive aspects under the Act. Um, Finally, one important issue is on the issue of in situ rehabilitation. The Under the SRA, in situ is a specific provision under the Act, and therefore the slum dwellers have a right to not only ask for redevelopment through their NGO or through themselves, but the alternative is also through the developer. It is this redevelopment through the developer that is being focused on, because it is the developer who takes over the redevelopment and then decides to evict people without providing the necessary rehabilitation. And I would just say that the issue of rehabilitation of the slum dwellers by the developer, the problem with the Bhim Nagar issue was that neither was any notice given to the slum dwellers. They were arbitrarily and forcibly evicted by the BMC, who actually it was doing this on behalf of the developer, Hiranandani. And Hiranandani's case is very uh, pertinent, because the case of Powai Area Development Scheme, which is the PADS, which was actually formulated by MMRDA in 1971, they entered into the MRDA, the state, and the private landowners who were small farmers in that area. They entered into a tripartite agreement and agreed to develop the area by providing affordable housing to the poor, to low income people. Under the agreement, and what is shocking is that under the agreement, 50% of the units were supposed to be small units of 40 square meters, and 50% were to be of 80 square meters. This was a requirement so that low income groups could obtain affordable housing. Yet, this was completely violated, and Hiranandani basically sold those flats by clubbing the tenements together and selling it at high prices to the rich. So the agreement, which was specifically meant for providing housing to the poor, was done away with, and PILs were filed challenging the violation of the agreement. However, the court appointed a committee, and the committee said that there be no violation, even though it was very clear that there had been violation. This Bhim Nagar is really an extension of that area, because there were people who were constructing the buildings in Hiranandani and were provided with accommodation on Bhim Nagar for several years. I mean, they've been living there for decades, and they were evicted because Hiranandani is planning to use that area for further development in terms of uh, buildings to be constructed on that land. So finally, I would just say that as far as the law is concerned, the law basically provides for certain benefits to the slum dwellers. Yet all this, the beneficial clauses in terms of eligibility, because the Act does not say that there should be a cutoff date, yet through the judgments or through courts, a cutoff date is being imposed, which basically will disallow people from getting rehabilitation. The second aspect is in terms of PAPs, people, persons, people living on a land where a public project is supposed to come up on, uh, would there's an exception to the law which says that wherever public projects are to come up, people can be evicted and rehabilitated in a place close to the area. Today, we know that many of people who are being evicted for either water, underground water pipes, or for other public projects are being evicted without following the law, without issuing any notice, and to far off places, whereas the law says that they should be located after consulting them, after giving a hearing, and within 2 kilometers of the area where they are, where the project is coming up. So, in conclusion, the problem is that the law is there to protect slum dwellers, yet it is not being done, and both the government as well as the builders and the local lobby is in collusion with each other in trying to prevent the slum dwellers to get their rightful share in their housing. Thanks.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That was very informative and Like you were saying, like there are a set of laws that are in place supposedly for the protection, but we see that increasingly every one of them is manipulated in some way to enable more the builders in in complete collusion with the state authorities. And like you were mentioning earlier, like about the cutoff dates that are also mentioned, which are framed in a more charitable or action by the state or something. But also we see in the case of Jai Bhim Nagar, even people who have been living for uh, much earlier are also like deprived of even claiming for this particular provision, because there is an active attempt, an active will of Hiranandani has been to prevent these people from getting any documentation which also proves that they have been the residents for from earlier, which earlier than the cutoff date, and through various things by controlling other amenities, not allowing them to have gas connections, electricity, etc. So it's in terms of policy changes, amendments, or in terms of working with, like you were mentioning, about the strategies used by builders of creating smaller units, then later merging them, evading all these kind of clauses that are in place, to active infringement of people's right to civic amenities, and declaration of what qualifies as a slum, how that has changed over years. As we see a consistent effort here in which the tables are being tilted towards the builder and the this idea of Hiranandani kind of posh areas and the dream city of Mumbai. So thank you so much for the talk. Now I will request Shakeel to speak. We'll have the questions at the end of the when all the three speakers have spoken.
Hello, everybody. I'm Shakeel here from Delhi, and I work from Basti Suraksha Manch, which is working in 52 buses in Delhi. And I started my journey from Bombay, where I was born in a slum near Devna. I grew up there, then I worked with Nivara, which was housing that organization formed by Ketas, Gurbir Singh, and Shabana Azmi. And then I moved to Delhi, and right now I'm working in Delhi. तो दिल्ली का मैं शुरू करता आई हैव टू स्पीक ऑन द दिल्ली कॉन्टेक्स्ट ना हेलो हेलो
Yes, yes, we
हेलो
can hear you. Yeah.
या हाँ तो बेसिकली दिल्ली में आप स्लम या बस्ती कूचने का जो आप देख सकते हो जो पूरा जो इतिहास है इट स्टार्टेड इन 70s. The first big demolition happened in 70s when the emergency was happening. Emergency took place, and there was a big slum of Muslim-dominated slum in an area called Turkman Gate, where around 1,200 houses were demolished. And there was a huge struggle against that demolition. There were a lot of cases against it, demolition, and uh, at least 4 or 5 people died in police firing. So that was the first case of demolition which took place in Delhi. Then it has been constantly going on in Delhi. And the other thing which is very important to understand is Delhi is not a state, it is semi-state. It is also a national capital because half of the Delhi departments are owned by the central government. They don't come under the Delhi government. Like if you say for the Delhi Development Authority or the central PWD or the railways, Delhi Cant, and there are many such organized agencies, um, land owning agencies, which exist in Delhi, but they are owned by. So there is always a constant struggle between the state government and the central government कि किसकी जगह पे कौन बसा है और and the court when we reach the court then there is always a fight going on कि ये किसकी जगह है ये ASI की जगह है ये फॉरेस्ट की जगह है फॉरेस्ट डिपार्टमेंट सेंट्रल में आता है स्टेट में आता है nobody knows कि कौन किस में आता है. So then the whole thing started, and there were major eviction happened during the when Governor Jagmohan was the LG of Delhi during the 2000 time, and there is an area called Zone O in Delhi, which is a 22-kilometer stretch of Yamuna floodplains, and there was one area of this area which was occupied by a lot of migrant workers, like domestic workers, street vendors, daily wage laborers, and he gave an overnight order कि इन सबको हटाओ यहाँ से. But then there was a lot of protest, and people came on the ground. They, almost 10 to 20,000 people went to the DDA office for the dharna, and and then this whole rehabilitation policy was came into being in Delhi. And but the process of rehabilitation was such that what Gayatri mentioned, accessibility, that was the main issue, because these people were thrown on the outskirts of Delhi where there was no livelihood access, there was no educational institute available, there were no jobs available for domestic workers or street vendors. It was like in the middle of a agricultural land. They built up, they bought some plots and gave it to. There were around 20,000 households in that area, but the I think only 3 to 4,000 people were rehabilitated. But from there, from where they were living, which was in the central part of the Delhi, very close to Jama Masjid and other places, and it was almost 40 kilometers away. There was no transportation to come back to work, and it took at that time it took almost 3 hours to reach one way to reach to where they were working, and then again go back. So it was really terrible, and a lot of people rented their houses or sold their houses, and then they came back to the same place. Again, they were demolished. So from 2000 onwards, the demolition has been a constant uh, thing happening in Delhi, and because Delhi is a major city where all the big events are happening. Like for instance, the Asian during the Asian Games in 1984, I guess I don't remember the year. Then during the Commonwealth Games in 2010, then again during the G20, which happened last year in December, there has been, in the name of beautification, or in the name of redevelopment, or in the name of riverfront development, there has been eviction happening constantly in Delhi. And the last figure which I have recently, like from December till right now, where I am sitting, there has been a demolition of almost 10 lakh people have been displaced by various agencies in Delhi, and this is happening in the Delhi, in the national capital. So you can imagine what's happening in the other states or cities. So this is the story. And then if you come to the relocation policy, Delhi has a agency called DUSI, which is the Delhi Urban Shelter Improvement Board, which is a nodal agency for all the rehabilitation of slum developers or the basti developers, and that agency does all the eligibility determination criteria, and if the people are coming under the cutoff date or not, and everything is determined by this DUSIP agency. And the DUSIP was formed in 2010. Before that, it was JJ Slum and Wing, and it became a separate identity. And it, so now the nodal agency for I'm not sure about the other cities, but in Delhi we have a nodal agency now, which is responsible for all the rehabilitation in the Delhi city. So, but if you see the way the evictions are happening and the procedure which Gayatri was mentioning about the Sudama Singh judgment and the Ajay Makan judgment, which is the latest judgment of 2015 when Shakur Basti was demolished, it is a 104-page order which clearly lays down the procedure to be followed while before evicting a basti. Like the due process has to be followed, the survey has to be done, eligibility and ineligibility has to be determined, people have to be rehabilitated. Only then and the public interest for that land has to be notified or has to be put up in the public domain. Whether they want this land for a hospital, whether they want the land for a park, or whether they want the land for something else. So the public interest has to be there before the eviction happens. So this was clearly laid down in this two judgment. One was the Sudhavan Singh judgment, which was given by Justice Chief Justice of Delhi, that time AP Shah and Sukumar Murlidhar, and then the Ajay Makan judgment, which was given by again by Sukumar Murlidhar and one more judge. So there, these two judgments has been clearly laid down. And then we have always have this UN, lot of UN guidelines and everything, which says the due process has to be followed before evicting people from their places. Now we come to the recent demolitions. Like right now, where I am sitting, Delhi is in last 1 week, we had major eviction of almost 12 bastis in Delhi, and they were all major bastis, and they were all like 40 years old, 30 years old, 50 years old bastis. They have all proven records. They all come under the cutoff date, which is 01012015 in Delhi. And but still the due process was not followed, and many people were excluded from the eligibility criteria. They went into the appellate authority, appealing against this ineligibility criteria, but there also it was got rejected. They went to the High Court, it also got rejected in the High Court. So now everyone is displaced. So we are again fighting on an individual basis or in each and every cases. But the whole thing is like I mentioned, okay, Delhi is not a state in itself. So a lot of things which is controlled by the central government, and there are a lot of things which are controlled by the state government, which is almost like a powerless in Delhi, because everything is almost everything is controlled by the central government. So we have formed various. There is a Delhi Housing Grant Task Force. Now there is a Awas Adhikar Manch. Then we have a campaign called Basti Suraksha Manch, which is going on from 2017 onwards, which is working in 52 bastis in Delhi, and we have protected a lot of bastis by going through courts or by coming on streets and doing dharna pradarshan. A lot of people have been put into jail because of our struggle, but still we have managed to save almost 10 lakh people from getting displaced in the last 3 4 years. But still the evictions are going on, and there is also a divide between the middle class and the working class. If there's a class divide here, because the middle class, at the same time, they want these people to come and work in their houses, or to bring their vegetable to their doorsteps, but they don't want to see them living inside a city. They are seen as an eyesore living in the city, and they always welcome whenever there is a eviction happening, because right now there's a lot of eviction happening, and they're like cheering it like it's like a IPL match going on here. And recently, I'll give you one of this class divide which happened was the Madrasi camp, which has been prominently came into all the major newspapers and the media. Madrasi camp is on a drain which comes from Andrewsganj and goes into Yamuna River. So this last year, this drain was clogged, and the whole area got flooded. So a lot of middle class colonies also got flooded. So they filed a case in the High Court saying because of these bastis, our houses are getting flooded. So the Delhi High Court should order that all of them be evicted. And immediately the order came, and almost I think 3,000 houses were demolished in the last 1 week. Taimur Nagar, Andrewsganj, Madrasi camp, and there's one more Valmiki camp. Only one basti was we were able to save. That was Kidwai Nagar, because there is a case going on, and they have already paid a amount of 1,42,000 to the Dusi for their rehabilitation because of the High Court order. So when uh, when I say about the process of the rehabilitation, so there are three major components who has to contribute their contribution for the rehabilitation of the busted developers. One is the landowning agency, which owns the land, and there is a state government, uh, which is obviously the DUSIP, and there is a third part which has to be given by the Basti developer. So which comes to around, for the general category, is 1,12,000 for the flat, and 30,000 for the maintenance of the flat for the 5 years by the DUSIP. And for the SC category, it's 1,000 for the flat and 30,000 for the maintenance. So it comes to around 31,000 for the SC category, and for the general category is 1,42,000, which is the DUSIP policy. And DDA charges 1,71,000. So this policy is there, and the cutoff date, as I already told you, is like 1/1/2015. So anyone who is uh, post pre 2015 living in that basti, and the basti exists from 2006, is eligible for rehabilitation. But generally what happens, the family grows, so they put one more mala over their houses, and the son gets married, or someone else gets married in the houses, or the daughter gets married, so they have their own house on the on the first floor, on the second floor, but they are not counted as a separate family. Like this happened in Bandrasi camp recently, like just 1 week back, and they are excluded from the. Though they have a ration card, they have a separate kitchen, which they can show कि हम लोग अलग से हमारा चूल्हा है, हमारा अलग राशन कार्ड है, हमारा अलग वोटर आईडी कार्ड है, but still they are excluded because they are living on the first floor or the second floor. So that, so this whole rehabilitation policy itself is very flawed, so to say. So, saying that, I would also say कि then there is a whole issue of people living in Yamuna Khadar, which is a Zone O area. Zone O area is a 21-kilometer stretch which starts from Palla village in the North Delhi and goes all the way into south into Okhla Barrage. And there are almost 90,000 people living there, and they have been living like some of the colonies are pre-independence. जब ब्रिटिश लोगों ने इनको सेटल किया था यहाँ पे, क्या उनके घोड़ों को कौन चराएगा? ब्रिटिश लोगों के जो घोड़े थे, उनको चराने के लिए ब्रिटिश सरकार ने इनको जमीन दी थी यहाँ पे, और उनके वो कागजात भी उस समय के। लेकिन उनको भी नकार के डीडीए ने एक अपने मास्टर प्लान 2021 में और 2041 अभी जो आने वाला है, उसमें उन्होंने जोनों को पूरा घोषित कर दिया है कि यहाँ पे कोई किसी भी तरह का रिहेबिलिटेशन नहीं हो सकता है। यहाँ पे भी क्लियर कट आपको क्लास डिवाइड दिखेगा, क्योंकि इसी जोन एरिया में एक बड़ा मंदिर बन सकता है, विच इज वन ऑफ द एशियाज लार्जेस्ट मंदिर, विच इज कॉल्ड द अक्षरधाम मंदिर। एंड देयर इज ऑल्सो वेरी gated middle class colony which was the Commonwealth village when the Commonwealth Games were happening in Delhi in 2010, and now it has been sold commercially. They are all in Zone O. In fact, I would say the Delhi Secretariat, which is the Delhi सचिवालय जो है दिल्ली का, वो भी जोन ओ में है, लेकिन उस पर कुछ होता नहीं है, उनको तो बख्श दिया जाता है। लेकिन वहाँ पे जो बस्ती हैं, जो 40 साल से 50 साल से या ब्रिटिश के ज़माने से रह रहे हैं, उनको तुरंत साफ किया जा रहा है। और अभी ऐसी हालत है कि बस वो साफ भी नहीं करते हैं। पहले तो ऐसा था कि तोड़ के चले जाते थे, अब वो तोड़ते हैं, फिर आते हैं और फिर गड्ढा खोद देते हैं ताकि लोग फिर से घर ना बनाएं या फिर से अपनी झुग्गी ना बनाएं। तो एक बहुत ही बर्बरता, एक बहुत ही ब्रूटल तरीके से इविक्शन हो रहा है। मैं कुछ फोटोग्राफ आप लोगों को भेज सकता हूँ, उसमें आप देख सकते हो। अब और आप जो रियाब पॉलिसी भी है, उसमें भी आप देख सकते हो किस तरह से उन्होंने इतना स्ट्रिंजेंट बना लिया है रियाब पॉलिसी को कि लोग उसको पालन ही नहीं कर सकते। जैसे कि आपको अपफ्रंट 1,42,000 भरने हैं। अब किसके पास 1,42,000 होगा? जो गरीब मजदूर होगा, तो उसको या तो वो हमने कितने बार सरकार को कहा है कि आप सॉफ्ट लोन प्रोवाइड करो, आप ईएमआई प्रोवाइड करो, आप कुछ और तरीके का उनको सॉफ्ट लोन का ऑप्शन दे दो ताकि वो इंस्टॉलमेंट में अपना पेमेंट कर सके, लेकिन उनको लमसम भरना पड़ता है। और वो भी कुछ लोगों ने 12 साल पहले भरे हैं, उनको अभी तक पुनर्वास नहीं हुआ है। कुछ लोगों ने 15 साल पहले भरे हैं, उनका अभी भी पुनर्वास हुआ। अभी तो वो अपना ब्याज भर रहे हैं, जिन्होंने अपफ्रंट कर्जा उठाया है, मार्केट से उठाया है या कहीं से उठाया है, या अपने गहने रख के मॉर्गेज करके पैसा लिया है, पैसा उठाया है, उनका भी अभी तक रिहेबिलिटेशन नहीं हुआ। ऐसे 12 बस्तियां हैं जो मैंने की है, और इनका 400 करोड़ रुपया डूसिट के पास पड़ा हुआ है। इन जो गरीब लोगों ने अपना किसी तरह से जमा करके डूसिट में दिया कि ताकि उनको एटलीस्ट जो 40 किलोमीटर 50 किलोमीटर दूर जो फ्लैट मिल रहा है वो मिल जाए, और तो वो अभी तक नहीं हुआ है। तो सरकार हर तरीके से, एक तरह से एक सरकार का एक फेलियर है इसमें हम देखें तो। और पुनर्वास की जो हालत है वो इस तरह से बुरी है कि वहां पे आपको ना तो नल है, ना इलेक्ट्रिसिटी है। और ये घर बने थे 2010 में, जब JNNURM बना था, और उसके तहत राजीव आवास योजना या राजीव रतन आवास योजना जो दिल्ली की पॉलिसी बनी थी, उस समय ये घर बन के तैयार हुए थे, लेकिन रिहैब नहीं किया गया, लोगों को पुनर्वास नहीं किया गया। तो उसके वजह से वो दरवाजे टूटे हुए हैं, खिड़कियां टूटी हुई हैं, पाइपलाइन टूटी हुई है, ऊपर की जो टैंक थी, वाटर टैंक थी, वो टूटा हुआ है। तो इस तरह से ये एक हो रहा है। अब और एक बड़ा अभी जो खतरा हम लोगों को आ रहा है दिल्ली में, वो है कि दिल्ली पूरा एक जो एसआरए की जो पॉलिसी उसको कॉपी पेस्ट करके दिल्ली या डीडीए जो भी है वो कॉपी पेस्ट करके दिल्ली में लाना चाहती है। और ये पीपीपी मॉडल उन्होंने एक शुरू किया था शकरपुर बस्ती में, जो 2006 में उसका उन्होंने इनॉग्रेशन किया था, रहेजा बिल्डर्स को दिया था। वो आज तक बन के तैयार नहीं हुआ है। आज तक लोग 3,500 घर थे, 2,500 लोगों को उन्होंने एलिजिबल पाया, उसमें से भी 500 लोगों को एक्सक्लूड करते करते चले गए, और अभी कुछ 1,500 घर बचे हैं। उनको वो लोग अभी भी ट्रांजिट कैंप में रह रहे हैं या कहीं और जाके रह रहे हैं, और अभी तक बिल्डिंग बनी नहीं है। तो यहाँ पे जो अकाउंटेबिलिटी की बात आती है, जो मैं आप लोग से भी जानना चाह रहा था कि बॉम्बे में जो एसआरए में है, कि अगर एक प्रोजेक्ट कोई एसआरए में बिल्डर उठाता है और फिर वो बीच में छोड़ के चले जाते हैं, तो अकाउंटेबिलिटी किसकी है? और कुछ टाइमलाइन होना चाहिए कि इस समय सीमित में इसमें निधि में उसको अपने मकान बना के दे देने चाहिए। अदरवाइज आई थिंक रेरा में कुछ इस तरह की कुछ ये है, हुसैन भाई बताएंगे इसके बारे में। लेकिन ये बड़ा चीज हो रहा है यहाँ पे दिल्ली में भी, और कम से कम 14 बस्तियों को चिन्हित किया गया है कि जिनको वो ये पीपीपी मॉडल में ये करेंगे, जिसमें बिल्डर आएगा, वो जगह पूरा बिल्डर खाली करेगा, उसमें से 1/3 में वो स्लम का रीडेवलप करेगा, और बाकी कमर्शियली वो अपना बेच देगा। तो ये एक तरह का जो खतरा जो आ रहा है अभी दिल्ली में, वो हम ये फेस कर रहे हैं कि ये जो एसआरए की जो है उसको पूरा कॉपी पेस्ट करके वो लोग दिल्ली में लागू करना चाह रहे हैं। और दिल्ली का एक यूनिक ये भी है कि दिल्ली में कोई भी फ्लैट में वर्टिकल में जाना नहीं चाहता है। दे ऑल विल प्रेफर दैट कि उनको प्लॉट मिल जाए। अब पहले क्या था, जब 2000 में जब रिहैब पॉलिसी के तहत 18 गज या 18 स्क्वायर यार्ड में का प्लॉट मिलता था, वो घट के 12 स्क्वायर यार्ड हो गया। उसके बाद अभी तो वर्टिकल हो गया है, मतलब 1+4 हो गया है, या कहीं पे 1+12 हो गया है। जो जो पीपीपी मॉडल बन रहे हैं वो तो 1+14 तक भी गए हैं, जो जिसको इन सितु एक तरह से बोलते हैं कि ये इन सितु मॉडल है। लेकिन लोग इतने मकानों में कैसे जाएंगे? जो ठेला में सब्जी बेचता है, वो अपना अगर उसके 12 माले में उसको फ्लैट मिल जाएगा, तो अपना ठेला लेके 12 माले तक कैसे जाएगा? और उसमें लिफ्ट का मेंटेन, उनको बड़े पावरफुल मोटर्स लगाने पड़ेंगे अपने ये इसको ये करने के लिए, पानी को खींचने के लिए। उसका पैसा कौन निकालेगा? और एक छोटे से 2 स्क्वायर फीट के घर में वो लोग, जहाँ पे कुछ होम बेस्ड वर्कर भी है, कुछ लोग अपना वर्कशॉप भी चलाते हैं, कुछ लोग अपना घरगुती काम भी करते हैं, तो वो लोग काम कैसे कर पाएंगे? तो इस पर भी मतलब कोई भी वर्टिकल में जाना नहीं चाहता दिल्ली में। आई एम नॉट श्योर कि बॉम्बे का सीन क्या है इस पे, लेकिन यहाँ पे दिल्ली में तो मैं देख रहा हूँ कि कोई भी वर्टिकल में जाना नहीं चाहता। वो कह रहे कि हमें प्लॉट दे दो, हम चले जाएंगे, लेकिन हमें वर्टिकल में नहीं जाना है। लेकिन अब मजबूरी हो गई है, क्योंकि धड़ा मतलब बहुत बहुत कम से कम मैंने कहा ना कि 8 से 10 लाख लोग डिस्प्लेस हुए पिछले दिसंबर से लेके G20 से लेके अभी तक। और अभी ये चलने वाला है, और क्योंकि अभी बरसात जब आएगी तो फिर से वो जितने भी जो ड्रेन्स है वो फ्लड हो जाएंगे। तो अभी एक ब्लैंकेट ऑर्डर आ गया है कि जितने भी अ, जो ये है ड्रेनेज है या वो है उसको साफ करना है। उसको साफ ड्रेनेज को साफ करना है, लेकिन उसके आसपास की बस्तियों को भी साफ करना है। अभी इसमें तैमूर नगर का एक उदाहरण है। तैमूर नगर के लोगों ने 2012 में पैसे भरे थे, और उनका भी पुनर्वास होना था, लेकिन उनका पुनर्वास नहीं हुआ, बल्कि उनका डिमोलिशन हो गया। अभी उनका केस भी हम कोर्ट में लेकर गए हैं। तो हमारे पास काफी कुछ क्लियर कट गाइडलाइंस है। दूसरी की पॉलिसी है 2015 की, सुदामा सिंह जजमेंट है, अजय माकन जजमेंट है, यूएन कन्वेंशन है, आर्टिकल 21 है, लेकिन कोई किसी का पालन नहीं करता है, और मतलब अंधाधुंध चल रहा है। और अभी तो यहाँ तक भी आज जो मैंने न्यूज़ सुना कि जो भी एक्टिविस्ट हाउसिंग राइट्स पे कुछ भी करेगा, तो उसके ऊपर एफआईआर दर्ज होगा। तो ये एक नई अभी आज ही मुझे सूचना मिली है। तो दिस इज अ सिनेरियो ऑफ दिल्ली। मतलब काफी भाग्य स्थिति है, और हर बार ब्यूटिफिकेशन के नाम पे, रीडेवलपमेंट के नाम पे, रिवर फ्रंट डेवलपमेंट के नाम पे, मतलब रिवर फ्रंट डेवलपमेंट में उनका प्लान क्या है कि वहाँ पे मिडिल क्लास लोगों के लिए जॉगिंग ट्रैक बनाना, फूड कोर्ट बनाना, और उस तरह के कुछ अजीब से आर्टिफिशियल लेक बनाना, आर्टिफिशियल पॉन्ड बनाना, उसमें कुछ मतलब इस तरह के अजीब से प्लान वो बना रहे हैं और वहाँ की बस्तियों को उजाड़ना। अगर आप अभी आओगे और देखोगे दिल्ली में, तो पहले जहाँ पे गाँव हुआ करते थे या बस्तियाँ हुआ करती थी, अब वो पूरे वीरान पड़े हुए हैं, वहाँ पे कुछ बना नहीं है। ना तो ट्रैक्स बने हैं, ट्रैक आधे अधूरे बन के बंद हो गए हैं, किसी कॉन्ट्रैक्टर को दिया, कॉन्ट्रैक्टर कर नहीं पाया, वो भाग गया बीच में, और उस और ये सब है। तो मुझे लगता है कि एक क्लियर कट हमें जो डिमांड, जैसा आपका मुंबई कलेक्टिव है या पे बस्ती सुरक्षा मंच है, कि हमें आवाज पूरे देश से उठनी चाहिए। अब ये सिर्फ दिल्ली बम्बई की बात नहीं है। हैदराबाद में 10,000 लोगों को जो रिवर के आसपास रहते हैं उनको हटाने का प्लान है। भोपाल में भी वही प्लान है कि रिवर के आसपास हटाना है। अहमदाबाद में अभी सियासत नगर को खाली किया, जिसमें 10,000 घर थे, वो एक चंडोला लेक के पास था। ऐसे बहुत सारे सिटीज है, लखनऊ में भी, लखनऊ में से भी सुना कि बहुत सारा एविक्शन हो रहा है। तो हमें एक लार्जर कलेक्टिव की तरफ जाना चाहिए, जो पूरे देश से बात आए, और एक बड़ा प्रेशर बनाना चाहिए, तब जाके कुछ होगा। हम आइसोलेशन में लड़ाई करेंगे या स्ट्रगल करेंगे तो हम कुछ नहीं हासिल करेंगे। तो हमें ऑल इंडिया लेवल पे या नेशनल लेवल पे हमें एक बड़ा एक कुछ मंच खड़ा करना होगा, तब जाके हम लोग कुछ हासिल करेंगे, और एक प्रेशर बढ़ेगा सरकार के ऊपर कि कुछ करने के लिए। तो मैं व्हेन देयर इज अ यूएन है, उसमें मैं अगर और कुछ जोड़ना है तो जोड़ूंगा। थैंक यू।
थैंक यू सो मच, शुक्रिया। शायद लेफ्ट, लेकिन काफ़ी वी got to hear some very useful insights from such extensive and active engagement with these communities and working around uh, these cases of demolition happening, like you were saying. In Delhi there are some added or like different nature of complications about conflict of jurisdiction, but overall largely the trends are the same, the implications are the same. And I think he Shakil also very well highlighted the other side of this thing, like the which community, which class is getting the most impacted, and in what way. Even having all of these um, rules and regulations or set in place, none of them how they play out in real life and in on the ground. I think that was very useful for us also. And as he rightly stressed towards the end, the need for more active and collaborative engagement in demolitions in these within these communities across cities, and forming more exchanges like this from which we can learn and strengthen the struggle going forward. I You mentioned a few things about like Mumbai, about like rehabilitation. I think we can definitely have that discussion once Hussain is also has spoken, and we will continue. And okay, I think now Hussain can carry forward the conversation. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Hi. So first of all, I'm very happy to be here. Um, this is I'm also happy to see that students have organized this and are doing some interesting work on the question of housing rights. So Shakil spoke about Delhi, and so maybe I should begin by saying a few things about Mumbai generally, city as a city, and how it is different to some extent, although many of the struggles are very similar. But Mumbai is a little different from other cities in India, mainly because the number of households living in slums in Mumbai is more than half, 52%, according to the 2011 census, which is quite outdated now. And if you also count the number of families who are living in one room tenements or less, we have about 75% of the city living in one room tenements or less. So it's a fairly stark situation in Mumbai in terms of the difference in housing conditions of the majority of the city, and the um, 20 to 30%, or actually less than that, of the city's wealthier residents. A lot of what happens in Mumbai gets exported to other cities in India. Shakeel mentioned that they're planning to do a SRA-like scheme in Delhi. But there are others. For instance, the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana had a cross-subsidy model, which is kind of inspired by the SRA. So yes, many things that happen in Mumbai in a way tend to affect other cities as well. So one has to pay attention to what's going on here. Anyway, we are meeting after a year after Bhim Nagar was demolished. Many people have, documented the details of the injustices that were done to the people of Bhim Nagar. So I won't get into those specifics. But the basic story is quite clear to everybody. Bhim Nagar was a workers' colony. People who built all those glitzy buildings in Hiranandani lived there. Over for 3.5 decades, the builder exploited construction workers as well as every piece of public land in the Powai area scheme, which was given to him presumably for affordable housing. And now that much of the land is gone, Bhim Nagar was cleared for something else. For Mumbai's real estate industry and the government, the problem since the 90s has been how to transform the habitations of the poor into profits for developers. And basically that is the framework within which all of these evictions, redevelopment schemes, real estate schemes, and so on are framed. Bhim Nagar, of course, was a victim of the same process. Gayatri mentioned a little bit about the Hiranandani and the scheme, which was prepared in 1986 as a tripartite agreement between the developer, MMRDA, and the landowners. And this land, it should be remembered, was given to Hiranandani at the rate of 1 rupee per hectare to build affordable housing. And if he had, in fact, delivered on that project, about 50,000 small and medium-sized houses would have been built in the suburbs. But of course, we know what happened there. Hiranandani is known as a luxury theme park for wealthier residents. In 2012, when the High Court was hearing a PIL on this case, on the Hiranandani case, the High Court, in fact, acknowledged that gross violations had been committed for the aggrandizement of the developer alone. However, the High Court did not impose any penalties on Hiranandani. Instead, it offered corrective actions in the form of 3,000 of new affordable housing units on the remaining vacant land in Hiranandani. Of course, I don't think that the builder has built that. Last week, there was the judgment of Hiranandani, and the judgment was in favor of Hiranandani. The High Court said that there was no evidence of corruption, monetary gratification, dishonest intention, or criminal conspiracy in the case by Hiranandani. And as to the accusations that the public land was issued at concessional rates, etc., the court said that it found no material or anything incriminating that there was any wrongdoing, and it would be futile and unnecessary to prosecute the builder. So the court also said that there are about 8,000 residents in Hiranandani, and none of them have ever filed any complaint against the builder. So perhaps the court was expecting that the customers of Hiranandani would come forward and object to them benefiting from an affordable housing scheme, which they purchased. Of course, it wasn't affordable for them. Maybe it was. Anyway, the point is that to expect the courts to enforce social justice is kind of like howling at the moon. We should remember that laws are to quote Proudhon, laws are spider webs for the rich and powerful, steel chains for the weak and poor, and they are fishing nets in the hands of the government, which is pretty much what is happening in Mumbai, especially where rights of slum dwellers are concerned. So in Mumbai, from the 1990s onwards, this PPP scheme for housing the poor, called the SRA, since it was introduced, housing has moved from a state subsidized and state financed program to slum redevelopment by monetizing urban land. And this is an important point to remember. The main purpose of slum rehabilitation is to monetize urban land. As a result, what has happened is that the government has moved away from addressing the needs of residents to addressing needs of builders and to make their projects profitable. What it has also done is that if you look at Bombay's development plan, there is a very close entanglement of the interest of real estate developers and the state, because implementation of the plan is done through the builders. So if you want an open space, the builder will provide it. If you want a school, the builder will provide it. If you want a hospital, the builder will build it. And if you want housing for slum dwellers, it's the builders who are going to provide it. So what this means is that every time there is an electoral demand or a demand by citizens of of housing or better infrastructure or whatever else, the way the government responds is by increasing the incentives for builders, because the builders are eventually the sector that is going to build those that infrastructure for the city. So this has created a very close entanglement. And this essentially is the crux of the problem for us, which is why when slum dwellers demand bigger areas for housing, so for instance, residents of Dharavi said, we don't want 300 square feet, we want 350, the government is very happy to accept such demands. In Motilal Nagar, which is another redevelopment scheme, which is going to happen soon, the residents have demanded an area of more than 1,200 square feet. So it becomes very, and this is easy for builders to do, because whatever rehabilitation area they build for slum dwellers, they get the same amount of area for sale. So they are perfectly happy in accepting those kinds of demands. What has also happened is that while on the one hand, state agencies over the past 2-3 decades, while state agencies have begun to behave more and more like private firms. For instance, if you look at Shakeel mentioned all of these different agencies in Delhi, the same situation exists in Bombay. There is MMRDA, MHADA, SRA, BMC, etc. All of these agencies have land holdings, and all of them want some to generate some kind of revenue from their land holdings. So earlier, MHADA used to build public housing. Then it started doing PPP projects with developers to build housing. Now, what it has started doing is that it simply gives its land to builders in exchange of premiums or revenue. So each agency wants to generate revenue from its land holdings while it doesn't do anything else. So state agencies are behaving more and more like private firms, and private firms are assuming powers of the state. So for instance, if you see the Dharavi redevelopment scheme, Adani has 80% of the voting share as well as the revenue share, which means that in effect, Adani is the state when it comes to the Dharavi redevelopment project. So which is essentially the kind of situation that has developed, has unfolded as a result of the gradual stepping back of the state from its responsibility of providing housing to being one that facilitates the private sector. Now, a little bit of history is necessary in this to understand this. In Mumbai, the first public housing projects were built after the bubonic plague which happened in 1896. And the reason why the state, before that, the state had made no interventions in terms of building housing or building infrastructure in poorer neighborhoods. What happened was, after the plague, there were many workers in the city who fled the city. And so at that time, the Mill Owners Association was a very big lobby. The Chamber of Commerce and Industry was a big lobby. And these agencies, institutions, recognized that retaining labor in the city was an important important problem that they had to deal with, which is why the colonial state intervened, built housing under the Bombay Improvement Trust, and then later the BDD chawls that were built for workers in the city. Those were the first public housing interventions. So it's important to also recognize that public housing came out of a crisis. It didn't come out because some people thought it's a good idea. And the crisis was a crisis for industry, for the city's elites, not for the city's poor have always lived in crisis. So it's for them it was nothing new. Now, after these projects were built, after post-independence, there was a commitment by the Indian state that they are going to set up a whole range of measures to ensure that people live in good quality housing. There was a Slum Clearance Act, but there were also other measures like the rent control law, which was introduced. There was the Slum Clearance Act itself. The Public Housing Board was set up. At that time, it was called the Maharashtra Housing Board. In the 70s, the Slum Act was introduced, and the Urban Land Ceiling Act was introduced. All of this signaled that the state is very serious about providing, housing for all inhabitants in the city. Of course, in reality, the state didn't do what it said it was going to do. Of course, there were lots of evictions in the city during the emergency. While the Land Ceiling Act was introduced, there were many evictions in the city. But on paper, at least, there was the commitment by the state that it's going to do. In fact, it would think of the private sector as unreliable. Now, what happened is from the 80s onwards, there was this gradual change in this perception, mainly due to liberalization policies. The World Bank came in. There were programs like the Site and Services Scheme and the Slum Improvement Scheme, which were introduced. And the conditions for World Bank aid at that time was the repeal of the Land Ceiling Act and the reduction of subsidies for housing, which means that the state should step back from providing housing directly to people, and it should be left more and more to the private sector. Of course, not everything that the World Bank said was done, but the cues were taken from the World Bank as to how housing should be done. It's also important to remember that the Slum Act itself came due to a very large mobilization of slum dwellers and and labor movements, because before the Slum Act there was no recognition of slums, no schemes like slum improvement and so on. And there was no protection for slum dwellers. But when the Slum Act was introduced, there was some kind of protections against evictions that came about. And it was important also to remember that the Slum Act did not have any discussion about legality of housing. The focus of the Slum Act was on housing conditions, meaning that if an area is overcrowded, if the building is dilapidated, if it has poor quality sanitation or services, then those kinds of areas would be declared as slums. So what that means is even formal buildings could be declared as slums. It was not necessary that slums were only what in Delhi you call juggi jhopadis and in Bombay you call jhoppadpattis. The idea was that slums are a kind of condition, an inadequate condition that needs some kind of intervention to improve those conditions. Of course, by the 80s and 90s, this changed. Now, increasingly, slums started being characterized as informal settlements. And formal settlements were not categorized as slums anymore, even if they are in poor, they are poor quality buildings. In the 90s, there was a new scheme introduced in 1991, which was similar to the SRA, but there was, which means that the idea was that slums will be cleared. Half of the land will be used to rehabilitate slums. The other half will be given to builders to sell on the market. But in 1991, the scheme had a cap on the developers' profits and a contribution by slum dwellers. In 95, the Shiv Sena came into, won the election, promising that if they win the election, they will provide 800,000 housing units to slum dwellers free of cost. When they won the election, they set up a committee. Gayatri mentioned the Afzalpurkar committee. And this committee had many different kinds of people, including activists, architects, bureaucrats, etc. The slum rehabilitation scheme took shape via the Afzalpurkar committee, and it had three objectives. The three objectives were that the living conditions of slum dwellers will be improved via redevelopment. There would be some kind of participation of slum dwellers in the scheme. So the consent norms were introduced. At that time, it was 71%. And that people will be rehabilitated on site. And this was because it was a recognition that people who live in informal settlements or slums live very close to or around their place of work. And if you build rehabilitation far away, people's livelihoods will be disrupted or lost. And therefore, in situ was a very important objective of the redevelopment. Of course, in practice, all these three have been violated in one way or the other. So, for instance, although the scheme is in situ, since the scheme was launched in 97, only around 350,000 units have been built. The goal was 800,000 in 5 years. Now we have around almost 30 years, and they have only built 350,000 units. Around 200,000 units are ex situ, meaning in other sites. And this is basically people who are evicted are rehabilitated on alternative sites. And these are some of the worst quality housing built in the city. In fact, the planning regulations for these resettlement colonies are totally discriminatory. You have one set of planning rules for the city generally, and for slum rehabilitation, you have a completely different set of bylaws, which accept poor quality living conditions, no access to light and ventilation, no amenities, open spaces, health, education, etc., which means that the living standards of people are either the same or reduced via rehabilitation and resettlement. In situ buildings are no better in that sense, but there are fewer, so the problems are less acute as compared to resettlement colonies. All of these resettlement colonies, which should also be remembered, are built for TDR, for builders. Builders don't build them because they care about the poor. They build them because they get TDR for building these. And a lot of TDR in Mumbai has been created by building resettlements, housing, these townships on the peripheries. In fact, to the extent that the three largest of these schemes, the Chandivali scheme, the HDIL scheme in Kurla for airport, slum dwellers who live on the airport land, and Mahul. In fact, most HDIL and Mahul are totally empty. Mahul is, the High Court has said, is unfit for rehabilitation, and HDIL is empty because HDIL took the TDR and basically went bankrupt soon after. And so, which just goes to show that the objective of these townships was to benefit builders, not really to create housing stock in the city. Now, apart from that, you have the question of participation, and everybody knows how participation works in slum rehabilitation schemes. The consent has now come down to 51%, but there are many different ways in which builders bypass these consent rules. They delineate schemes in a way that excludes people who don't consent to schemes. There are numerous cases of misinformation, corruption, intimidation, and coercion by builders to get people to consent to the schemes. In many cases, people who no longer who don't exist have given consent, which means they are simply inventing people to create consent. And so consent has been totally undermined in regulations and in practice. Now, Gayatri mentioned that the Slum Act required some kind of, the Slum Act required slums to be improved and upgraded. But of course, after the SRA has come in, slum declaration for upgradation has completely stopped. So now residents have a choice: either accept a builder for rehabilitation or continue to live in terrible conditions and nobody will take care of you, which is the kind of choice that slum dwellers have, which is why you also have the situation where a lot of slum dwellers agree to go for redevelopment. So one of the things that people have been saying in Mumbai is for the government to declare these slum areas and carry out improvement works. But of course, if they do that, the land is not available for builders to exploit. So which is why they don't do it, essentially. Now, there was a talk about cutoff dates, and it should be remembered that when the Afzalpurkar committee wrote its report, that was 96, and the cutoff date was 97. What they imagined was that by keeping a date of 95, almost all slum dwellers will be covered by the scheme, and in 5 years, everybody will be rehabilitated. We'll have a slum-free city, and therefore the cutoff date that was introduced by Afzalpurkar committee included all slums in the city. But since the implementation of the scheme has gone on for 30 years without much success, the cutoff date is still 95, which means that anybody who comes into the city since after the cutoff date was extended to 2000, they are not eligible for housing. So, the city wants work done, but it does not want workers. Essentially, that is the idea of these cutoff dates, which is, what it has also done is it has created a regime of, differential entitlements and all the problems as a result, which I'll talk about. Now, for for housing rights activists, there are various kinds of conundrums. You had told me to talk a little bit about the housing rights movement and what is the way forward. There are many kind of many issues faced by the housing rights movement. One of them is that the welfare of slum dwellers, mainly because of schemes like the SRA, are completely tied up with the profits of builders, which means that if builders don't perform, if the city's property developers don't find anything profitable, the city does not get amenities, it does not get open spaces, it does not get housing. What that means is that if slum dwellers want better quality housing, they have to look for builders. Now, this is a serious kind of problem, because any proposal that is outside this arrangement immediately gets shot down. The other conundrum faced by activists is that this what I mentioned, regime of differential interests, which means that there are different kinds of entitlements for different kinds of slum dwellers. There are eligible slum dwellers before 2000 who are eligible for free housing. Then there are people from 2000 to 2011 who can get subsidized housing. Then there are people after 2011 who get no housing. this, what it has done, it has created eligible, ineligible, and invisible slum dwellers. And the problem is, in any slum, any scheme, you will very quickly have eligible residents agreeing and consenting to the scheme, which is which makes any kind of organizing efforts to bring people together almost impossible. So this is another challenge faced by activists. Um, the third is that housing rights has increasingly come to mean property rights, and another term which is commonly used is affordable housing. What this has done is that the horizon for activists has been completely narrowed. Housing activists now speak the language of entitlements and benefits, and are unable to conceptualize housing rights as tied up with broader struggles for universal public goods and services, such as, which would imply public housing, rent controls, controls on land speculation, taxing vacant land and vacant housing, etc. These opposition to privatization of goods and services and so on, all of these are essentially at the heart of what will make the city inclusive, not simply a focus on, extending cutoff dates and so on, but because the logic of housing is such that activists are, in a sense, have begun to speak that language as well. Finally, there's the other problem, the other conundrum of discriminatory planning, where you have two different kinds of planning for two different classes of population, which means that for the poor, you have extremely poor quality rehabilitation and living conditions, very privatized services, poor quality healthcare, poor quality education, transportation, and the wealthy can simply escape the city via, luxury developments with podium gardens and gyms and all of the other things. And so there is, there is a completely divided kind of urban development, and as a result, the public realm of the city, what we call the public sphere of of the state, is completely slumified. So you go to Fort in Mumbai, which is a very, very opulent area, and you'll find there is no the roads are broken. There is no parking provision. The entire public realm in the city, in any part of the city, you will see, is basically in shambles, and that's simply because a few people can escape all of the problems of the city, by simply buying their way out of the problem. So, to conclude, what can be done? I think the biggest challenge for us is how to decommodify land. Public land should remain in public hands in perpetuity and be used for public purposes, for creating public goods and services. What we also need to do in terms of specifically speaking about housing is to concentrate on slum improvement programs on the one hand, but also simultaneously the creation of public housing on public land. What we need to do is to create a situation where slum dwellers voluntarily move to housing that they can afford. Public housing, obviously, no other kind of housing they will be able to afford. And that would then create more possibilities of public housing. So we need to do this simultaneously and not think that by demolishing slums or simply by rehabilitating slums, the problem of slums will, the problems faced by slum dwellers will disappear. And we also need controls on land prices, measures to tax vacant housing and vacant land, and bring in more controls on the real estate industry, which can then create the possibility of some form of redistribution, which can, of course, go to finance any kind of progressive public housing program. So that's all I'll say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That wonderful talk. Um, I think you pointed out some very crucial points. For example, you were mentioning how state is behaving, is becoming more and more like private firms, which in turn enables also the private firms becoming the state, and that complete takeover of all public infrastructure and all urban rights, and that which you so rightly said, some of the challenges that we also face while working in these bastis is of that precise nature also, like you said, expanding the horizon of like how we think about housing itself, which I think in the initial talk Gayatri ma'am also touched on, that how housing should, it's not about property, and to understand that the concept of housing in a more housing rights in a more elaborate and comprehensive way. And definitely, which you also touched upon in your talk, the limitation of the law, limitation of the legal procedures and framework that are in place, and how we have seen time and time again, and continue to see the inefficiencies of that playing out in the in our everyday, like when we engage in work across cities, not at all limited to Mumbai or Delhi, even in other cities we see that. So thank you all, three of you, for your talks. We can take questions now if anybody has any questions that you'd like to ask, some comments.
Hello?
Uh,
Hello?
could you please, yeah, anybody who'd like to ask can just
Hello?
raise your hand. Yes, 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 Shaki, we
Yeah,
can hear.
yeah. I just wanted to ask the Bombay folks, what happens when in a SRS scheme, if the builder leaves the project midway and the people are like languishing in transit camp for 30 years or 40 years or whatever. So, what is the accountability of the state and the builder? Is there anything to catch hold of the builder? Because this SRS scheme is coming in a big way in Delhi. So, we are worried that if the suddenly the project is not viable or it's not marketable, or or whatever reason the project is not profitable for the builder, then he just leaves out of the project. So what in that what does the SRA says, and what does the RERA says about it? That's one specific question.
Should I take that one?
Sure, sure.
Um, I think so. First of all, there are many cases in Bombay where projects have started and they have stalled. They under the SRA, there are many different cases of people who are living in transit camp for 20, 30 years, and have not been uh, allotted housing. So the accountability mechanisms are very weak. The one thing that can happen, doesn't happen, is that another builder can come and take over the project, but that very rarely takes place. Now it's important to understand. So one thing that Shakil, that you mentioned, is that Delhi is adopting an SRA model. Now it's important to think about to understand that SRA doesn't work in Bombay in many localities. It has worked in certain places. Now, generally when we talk about, when I mentioned that SRA has done only 350,000 houses over 30 years, it's important to ask, why is that the case? Why, if the scheme is so profitable, why have all of the slums in the city not been rehabilitated? And the reason is very simply that in many cases, the scheme simply doesn't work for builders in terms of what they expect out of a slum rehabilitation scheme. The word expect is very important. It's not that if the builder gets a small profit, they'll do the scheme, because it has to be worth their effort. So there is an expectation of very high returns through a slum rehabilitation scheme, which has also meant that in many localities where property values are very high, SRA projects have happened. But in areas where property values are low, SRA has not happened. So when this scheme goes to Delhi, it's most likely in many cases it will not seem viable for developers in Delhi. It depends, but in my opinion, it will not, because although Delhi land values are high, but they're not as crazy as Mumbai. As to the question of RERA, the RERA regulates sales, not rehabilitation tenements. And RERA has not been extended to the tenants or slum dwellers who are provided rehabilitation by the developers. Even cooperative society, cooperative society tenants are not covered under RERA. RERA only covers the sale part of the schemes. Although, and it's an important point, because if you look at the RERA Act, the term that is used is allottee, not buyer. So there is the possibility of enforcing the RERA or getting the RERA to cover even rehabilitation units. And if that happens, that may be a good thing, because at least there will be some level of accountability that can be built into these rehabilitation projects. Gayatri, if I missed anything, please.
I just want to add one. There is a provision under the Slum Act, Section 13, which says that if the developer does not carry out its obligations, etc., the SRA can withdraw the builder and get another fresh developer appointed. Now the problem is that because there is no proper monitoring by the SRA basically accepts whatever the proposal that has been given by the builder, and is very reluctant to actually get rid of the builder and get him or her replaced by some fresh builder. So that is one major problem. And the second problem is that before the builder starts developing that property, they sign an agreement with the society and the residents of that area, which basically says that in case the builder wants to get loans from the bank and create encumbrances on the land, he is actually freed from doing it. So basically, most of these developers take loans from the banks and create encumbrances on the land, and then when they're not able to implement it, they just disappear from the scene. So in terms of agreements, what sort of agreements should be signed between the landlord and between the society and the developer and the SRA, that those clauses should be scrutinized carefully so that the builder does not get prominence in terms of implementing the scheme.
Thank you. Um, Anyone else would like to ask a question? Yes. Go ahead, Dipti.
Hi. Thank you for the insightful talk, first of all, and thank you for organizing this. And so basically, I was wondering, this is also something that is something worth thinking about, because I was at the start of the talk, I was wondering about, what happened to the the public vision of having like very affordable housing, which to some extent I knew that Madha was doing, in the 50s and the 60s, if I'm not wrong. And then like Hussain said, that by the 80s and the 90s it kind of liquidated into a very PPP project of sorts, where everybody is sort of relegating responsibility to the other person, and the beneficiaries are just looking at, I don't know, years and years of just paying their dues and waiting for things to happen. But I sort of, my question is like, I'll bifurcate my question into two. First is that and this is directed to all three speakers. What do you think that we can do in terms of what can be a proactive demand for just saying that, we are not just going to react to what the state is doing. We're not just going to sit back and wait for demolitions to happen and wait for you to sort of live up to the demands of people. But what can be a very proactive demand to say that, bring back the idea of public housing, bring back the idea of really the state owning up to the responsibility of making public housing a reality, right? This is first, and the second is essentially something that I've been thinking of, in terms of what Hussein said about, public ownership and distributive justice. So when we say public ownership or public purpose, we also know that the court has sort of, not just the court actually, but legislatively and also judicially, the definition of public purpose is very twisted. Like, public purpose also allows government to acquire lands on behalf of the private company, saying that this is a public purpose. So there's no, I don't know, in my knowledge there's no like concrete definition of public purpose that doesn't allow the public private collusion to happen. If there is, then I'd like to know about that. But also distributive justice, I would say that the courts have also liquidated the definitions of distributive justice, because I think, as far as I know, last December there was this court judgment in Property Owners Association with the state of Maharashtra, where the Bombay High Court, oh sorry, it was a Supreme Court judgment. Supreme Court said something along the lines of, you can't, not all not all private properties can be acquired in the name of public purposes. Not every private property can be acquired in the name of public purposes and can be distributed to the public, because it's the material resources of the community, etc. So what my question is, the second question is that, how do you think, when the courts are taking such stances with regards to what redefining with regards to what public purposes or distributive justice is, which is, of course, the interpretations are very liberal. It allows uh, pollution by private companies, right? Where they are just taking their share of things and not really essentially being responsible for the workers, so in that sense, how do we demand public public ownership or distributive justice in that sense, when the court is itself not really willing to recognize that distributive justice or public purpose can be something which is strictly or rather proactively serving the public and not the private players?
Thank you. I think any one of the three speakers can take this first.
Okay, fine. Since nobody is saying anything, uh, um, thanks for those questions. I think you're absolutely right. The way in which the phrase "public purpose" has been used has been totally deformed and distorted beyond recognition. And what is happening increasingly is what is defined as public interest actually means special interests. And when one does in fact talk about public interest, it is considered to be, anti-development or this, that, or the other, whichever new phrase that the government or the its spokespeople come up with. I think it's important to remember that any concept which may seem to be, very progressive, can be used for all kinds of ends. There's nothing inherent in a concept that says, okay, it has to be used for progressive ends. Public purpose is one, democracy, or whatever you term that you pick up from social and political theory is the same. So what is public interest is the meaning to that term has to be given by people who by people, not by the state. We shouldn't let the state define what a public interest is. The public should define what the public interest is, and that it's important to do that because I know there's a tendency in academia to think that, oh well, public interest, the state uses it to do all kinds of these things, so let's drop it and let's talk about something else. I don't think that really is a smart thing to do. What we need to do is to give that concept more meaning, and by spelling out what we mean by public interest, right? So what is redistribution? You will notice that how does the BMC budget work in Bombay? the BMC spends a lot of money. It is a very rich corporation, a municipal corporation, and a lot of that revenue used to come from octroi, but now octroi is discontinued. So there's another source, other sources, and the main source of revenue for the BMC is by selling real estate premiums. So what they are selling builders rights to build more, and that is how they're making money. Now, if that is the case, obviously the infrastructure that they're going to provide is for the builders and for the customers of those builders, right? Earlier, when you had a taxation system where the revenue came from income or from other kinds of, or if you kind of create a more progressive regime of property rights, for instance, so landowners and property owners are paying more taxes, then you will have a different way in which the state prioritizes where it is going to spend that money. So it's important to think about this, not simply in terms of how words are used, but what kind of meanings we give these words, right? Public interest would mean that all the public land in the city is kept for public purposes, meaning public healthcare, public education, public transportation, public housing, not for builders to, how much builders are charged for land in SRA schemes. If so, you have a slum on a piece of land. When the builder comes in and starts the redevelopment, the builder only pays 25% of that land's ready reckoner value, its value on paper, only 25%, which means the builder basically gets a freebie. And all of the sale that the builder makes, he pockets essentially, right? So there is a lot of subsidies, benefits built into these programs for real estate developers. Now, as the public, we can simply say, look, this is public land. Why are you giving it away for free? We should get the full value of land. Or in the case of Dharavi, 70% land is BMC land. It just wrote off all of the land and gave it to the Dharavi Redevelopment Authority, right? So we have to think about the resources that the city has, and ensure that not only is the public land preserved, but we get more land into the public pool so that we can then use it for redistributive justice, as you mentioned. Yeah.
I would just add one point, and that is the definition of public interest is very, very broad and can be interpreted in any way possible. So, for example, under the Land Acquisition Act, when land of farmers is taken over, the issue that comes up is this: can it be taken over if it is with the land of the farmers and companies, say for example, setting up a factory on that land? And in many cases, the courts have said that it is in public interest to take away the land of the farmers and give it to a private party to set up a factory, because it provides employment to people. So therefore, it's an issue which we need to deal with in terms of how we see, as Hussain has said, how do we see public interest? How do we define it? And it can be seen in many cases. For example, under the Urban Land Ceiling Act, when the Urban Land Ceiling Act was repealed, there were lakhs and lakhs of land which had been declared as surplus, and it was supposed to be given up for public purposes like housing, which was never done. because the builders just came over, took over the land, and then said that now we are constructing these houses for the rich, and that is in public interest. So the issue of public interest is very, very controversial, and I think that we need to, in all aspects, whether it's land acquisition matters, whether it's taking over property for constructing hospitals or schools, this issue is going to come up, and we need to deal with this on a war footing.
Thank you so much, speakers.
Thank you. Shakeel, would you also like to answer this? Okay, maybe once he's able to respond, we maybe get back to this. Meanwhile, if anybody has any other questions, they can go ahead. Yes, Swati, go ahead.
Yeah, good evening, all. I'm from Mumbai and I'm professor in electrical engineering. So, this discussions or this area is not much familiar to me, the legal words and all. But what I understand is the problem is crucial, and it is when we talk about public interest. Uh, we have to define what is public interest and who the public which for which we are talking about. So, and for Mumbai, elections are coming, municipal elections. So, and this is a very big problem, not only for slums but also for those who are residing in buildings. Because the builders, the corporates, and the corporation all are working in their only in their interest. So middle class people is also not happy, and if we can catch this particular element right now, when the elections are ahead, that will be a very, we should make them talking about this. This should be in public domain, this topic. So, are we planning something in that regard, like giving more publicity to this issue, or uh, advertising more about it? What is our plan? Are we having any plan?
That's the question. Yes, what is our plan? I think, are you directing this to any particular speaker? I think Hussain touched about it briefly towards the end of his talk. Like what to do going forward. How do we carry on the, how do we formulate these questions and that sort of thing. Yeah. If you'd like to add anything more, that'll be.
No, so Swati, thanks for the question. I think there are many things that we can bring up in the election. Although I would caution against pinning too much hopes on the election. The record of all political parties is equally bad when it comes to these questions, urban development in Mumbai. You should, I mean, just think back. Dharavi redevelopment. The first program was Congress, then Shiv Sena, then BJP. So it is we have we have gone through all of these parties, and there is not much difference in terms of their positions on this. All of the parties are pro privatization. All of the parties are acting contrary to public interest. what we can do in each of our issues that we are working on is to push for things that we regard important in terms of public interest. For instance, if you're working on transportation issues, you can think about the way in which BST is being, the public bus system in Bombay is being privatized and completely dismantled. In the housing sector, a lot of activists are working on challenging SRA, extending cutoff dates, expanding the concept of eligibility, trying to get the government to um, intervene in housing more directly. So if for each thing that you're working on, you can push in different ways. There are people who are working, for instance, against privatization of these installation of electric meters, which was recently proposed. There are people who are working on getting water supply to slums. So it's it just articulating abstractly what the public interest is useful, but if you want to impact the elections, you have to make concrete demands on specific things and push at and make sure that your political parties somehow get some of those demands into their manifestos, and then you hold them accountable and make sure that they deliver on those promises.
Yes, thank you. Like you were saying,
Thank you.
always, like, how do we manage expectations and how much of our efforts are going towards um, from these political parties who are very clearly, like we've been talking, are complicit in the whole network that we're calling Builder Raj. That's something to um, talk about also in like long term. Uh, any other questions anyone has? We can take maybe a couple more and
Okay, one more question I have, that is, at present, what is the status of this Bhim Nagar case? And mm, uh, uh, for
yeah.
nowadays, since rainy season is coming, what is the status of the people over there right now? What is the condition?
Yes, so they are still some of the residents are still camped on the footpath. They've lived through one monsoon last year. Started the demolition happened at the beginning of the monsoon, so it has been a year, and they continue to stay at the footpath. There's a criminal proceeding going on in Bombay High Court with regards to the illegality of the demolition, which has been proven. But so far, an FIR has been registered against some of the people involved, including the assistant commissioner of the BMC and a few other parties. But as for rehabilitation, there has been no hope in sight so far. But yeah, the struggle is still going on. Thank you. Anyone else?
Okay.
If this, yeah, thanks. Uh, if anyone else has any question, we can take one more. All right. If there are no more questions, then I think we can end this. Thank you so much for everyone for joining, and particularly thank you to all the speakers. Um, just like I think we covered in the discussion with all three of the speakers who indicated how the terms and condition of housing is very much in the interest of builders. Uh, and in this framework, all the tools and policies being designed from reduction of uh, from the definition of protected occupants to this quite tricky the issue of cutoff dates that was being discussed, which Gayatri ma'am also mentioned, to the response of rehabilitation policy, which is part and parcel of the crisis that is induced by the rise of builders, rise of the stakes that a builder has in governance, which also Shakeel brought up. Um, you also mentioned the increasing absence of public interest in these governance models, which is also an indication of uh, in response to that what people's movement can do. And Hussain also pointed towards this direction. I think in when he was talking about what to do by was articulating that the framework of housing, how to take it beyond the framework set by neoliberalism, basically, and where the demand of housing rights is not exhausted by the language of property rights, which was also saying that the entire discussion is dictated by their language and how what we demand for, how to move beyond that, and which with the questions coming is we see only possible by building people's movement, which is for these challenges of real estate dictates, both in ideologically and increasing control of people's interest. And from our organization and various organizations that work around these issues, we also believe that students movement is also has a role in challenging these neoliberal frameworks and thinking about housing, education, and others beyond its commodification, like Hussain was saying, how to decommodify housing, and towards the same interest, decommodifying other things which are in public interest. If anybody would be interested to know more about collective or would have any interest in joining the organization, I will just drop the link in the chat here. Please have a look and you can contact us. And thank you so much again for everyone for joining, and all the three speakers. Thank you again for your talks. I think all of us got to learn a lot through this. We'll end this now. Thank you.